Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations in Horror. I am your extremely handsome host, Kevin L. Powers. I'm also the festival director, program director for Something Wicked Film Festival and Events, and I want to welcome you to our show. Now, what we do on Conversation in Horror is we take and de-evolve certain horror films of which have either cult status or films that people just have not seen at all, ever. Tonight's film is one of those films where it falls a little bit in between because there are a lot of people who say they've seen the film, and then there are a lot of people who have avoided the film like the plague. That film would be the adaptation of Stephen King's Cujo. And to speak about Cujo, I have is Philip Ray. And Philip Ray is a filmmaker. No, he's not a filmmaker. He's a theater guy. I get theater guys every once in a while, guys. He's a theater guy, lighting designer, lighting programmer, a very talented individual, but he's also a judge for my Something Wicked Film Festival and Events. So he is a very avid film watcher. He has seen so many types of films, it's ridiculous, which means that our conversation tonight is going to be highly entertaining. Thank you, Philip, for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm a big film buff. And very special with this movie too, Cujo, because I'm a big dog lover and I also have a big dog. I do not have a Saint Bernard, but I have a Tibetan Mastiff, which if you Google search a Tibetan Mastiff, you will see they're big, scary looking dogs, but same thing. They are like my dog specifically is a sweetheart, and he does not have any type of ill mean thing in his body. He doesn't know what aggression is.
So I would like to say that even though I'm a huge Stephen King fan, I've read a lot of his books. Cujo is one of the ones I happen to not have read, mostly because a lot of people who tell me about Cujo, the book, say it's a very typical early Stephen King book, and I've enjoyed a lot of the stuff that was in his later career, and I've just not gone back to it. That being said, I did grow up with this film, so my ideals about the film are completely different than someone like you who did not grow up with the film. So please tell me a little bit about the first time you saw this film or what your experiences were when you saw Cujo.
Well, talking about the book real quick, I didn't read the book either, but a little fun fact, a lot of people's opinion of Cujo is kind of mixed. Even Stephen King originally, because he doesn't even remember writing it. He wrote the book in the height of his drug addiction, alcohol addiction. So he actually mentions on the writing, which was a memoir of Stephen King, that he actually doesn't remember writing the book at all. He doesn't remember it. Now he reflects on it and he actually really likes his book, but he doesn't actually remember writing the book at all. So the genericness of the story can kind of coincide with, you've got to imagine a drug-filled Stephen King writing the story. Which the actual inspiration of it was based on it was a mixture of an incident he had in Maine with where his motorcycle died, and he actually got kind of attacked by a Saint Bernard at the garage he was at, trying by the mechanics Saint Bernard that almost attacked him, which was basically a direct inspiration for the book and stuff. My experience with the movie is I actually watched it fairly recently for the first time. It's very funny because you don't see it a lot nowadays, but back in the 1980s, there was that good period of animal attack stories. You had Cujo, you had The Birds, which is a little bit earlier than that. You had around then was a big period of animal attack movies, which you don't see a lot nowadays. So it actually was kind of a interesting for me to go into that of going, because I didn't watch a lot of that stuff because, again, also I'm a dog lover and stuff. So the idea of a killer dog is didn't entertain me at the time, but it was very interesting watching this movie for the first time recently with that in mind.
Well, I'm the opposite. Even though I've always owned dogs, I love killer dog movies. So this one and like Man's Best Friend and even Rottweiler are fun movies for me. Uh, this one is not really a fun movie. Unlike a Man's Best Friend and Rottweiler, this is the opposite of a fun movie. So for those of you who have not read Stephen King's novel or have seen the movie Cujo because you just never hit your radar, essentially a woman gets stuck at her mechanic, unable to drive away, while a dog that Saint Bernard that has contracted rabies keeps or holds her in siege. So her and her son are stuck in a car the entire movie, of which they can't escape because this dog is keeping them locked up. And she does everything that she can, the mother, to try and get help for her son who's suffering from heat exposure and asthma and a little bit of everything else. So it's a ticking time bomb type of movie that she has to get help, but she has to face off a rabies dog. So that's generally the gist of it. And if you've seen or read Stephen King's Gerald's Game, the same concept is very much there. I think it's a much better realized concept in Gerald's Game than it is here, but it did for Saint Bernard's what Jaws did for sharks. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, it's funny because again, with Saint Bernard's, Cujo became the affiliation, even though at the same time, like it's also interesting too, because if you watch a lot of those I think it's the Looney Tunes cartoons, there was a Saint Bernard like character that like I always associated too as well. Trying to look up the name real
The name of
quick.
the I don't know the name either, but there was that famous Saint Bernard character. I don't know if the Saint Bernard character had an actual name or was it.
He did not. He did not. But yeah, like that was the association too. For a lot of people was the Saint Bernard character in the Looney Tunes cartoons as well. So
Until the movie Beethoven came out, I'm sure.
yeah, and then Beethoven, then
Beethoven 1, 2, 3, and 20, those kept coming out. And those erased everything that Cujo and Stephen King had done.
yeah.
So I actually, as a kid, when I saw this movie, it terrified me. I've always grown up with dogs. And unfortunately for my family, my sister, my older sister, had babysitted someone who, a little girl who had eventually got attacked by her own dog, and those type of stories always terrified me. So this movie, when I was a kid, terrified me. I mean, just to see, I didn't know what rabies was. I just knew the dog was crazy, had lots of blood in it, and it kept these two people trapped in the car, and it had the mother of E.T. in it. That's pretty much what I knew about Cujo when I saw it as a kid. As you get older, and I became a huge Stephen King fan, I saw all the other aspects in it. The fact that she's having an affair on her husband. There's a whole bunch of different aspects that make it much more interesting as a character study. That I'm sure there a lot of people don't realize because they're too busy paying attention to a dog with rabies keeping this mother and son trapped in the car.
Yeah, the thing is, the secondary story is very interesting with the affair and stuff, and I find, and it's this is probably jumping the gun a little bit on the story itself, but kind of going spoiler tears already. One thing I found interesting was the fact that it seemed like the you think that the husband would get a lot more focus too on the fact that he finds out about the affair and stuff, and at the end you would think that he's going to be the one to save them, but he really is an afterthought. For most of the story, it really becomes the mother story the entire time about her having this affair, realizing that she needs to stop having this affair, and then after that, basically trying to repay her actions of basically betraying her and her husband by protecting her child from this dog, and at the end killing this dog. Like, that was one of the most interesting things about this story, in my opinion, is the fact that, she's basically a scream queen to the story, essentially. And the fact that she's the one that ends up taking down Cujo and not the husband and stuff, I thought was a really neat thing.
Hmm. I agree, especially for a film that's from the 80s. You would think that they build up the husband as a character that's going to be the one her savior. But by the end, he really only shows up after she's already saved her son, gotten him into the house, and killed the beast. So this is like a woman versus nature film instead of just being your typical man versus nature, or man versus actually, you could call it a woman versus nature, because essentially the Cujo is an innocent dog who gets rabies from a bat, of all things. It is kind of a sad story, the fact that the rabies drives the dog slowly crazy against its own owners and then against other people. So
Yeah, and the fact too of like the movie does a really good job as throughout of like the slow decay of Cujo is really is sad. Like if you're a dog lover and stuff, seeing that it's really sad because again, it's they don't spend a lot of times of building up Cujo beforehand and stuff. Because again, like they say that he's like a sweet-natured dog and stuff, but again, seeing the physical, like they do a really good job of seeing the physical decay of Cujo to a point, but by the end, it's like in Old Yeller, another story about a dog getting rabies and stuff, and that you don't again that's more of a children's movie, so you don't get this really harp on that too much about the dog like looking with the rabies, but in Cujo they definitely show you like again by the end he's pussy, covered in blood, snot everywhere. Like again, he is fully transformed from the dog you saw at the beginning of the movie and stuff, which I thought was really good.
yeah. So this being a like I kind of hinted at before, this is a much different type of a dog killing movie than say Man's Best Friend or Rottweiler, where the dogs were always designed to be bad dogs, even though in Man's Best Friend, if you've seen that, I'm not sure if you've seen that or not. It starts off as being a man's best friend. With Cujo's you don't typically think of a Saint Bernard as being an evil dog, and the owners of the dog, the little boy owner, and then of course the man owner after the boy is off, it's a family dog. The dog goes wherever he wants to. He's not being chained, he's not being abused. He's a dog with free reign, and unfortunately allowing that dog complete free reign allowed him to be able to get rabies, instead of it's almost like a neglect thing. I kind of saw that when I rewatched it a few years ago. The whole thing about Cujo gets rabies almost because of the neglect of its owner, and of course Dee Wallace's character is neglecting her family, and this happens to her. And for her to, like you've mentioned before, she has a redemption at the end when she decides to do everything that she can to save her son, and then of course her husband shows up, and they become a family unit again. But in order for that to happen, they have to kill freaking Cujo, which is
So
you know.
So one thing I'm kind of curious about your opinion on because there was a lot of mixed opinions from people about the change because you say you haven't read the book. So the book change is actually the Tad dies. The boy actually dies. They kill the boy off in the book, and they decide to keep the boy alive in the film, obviously, which to me, it actually, because of the whole story of redemption, it actually makes more sense, in my opinion, to keep the boy alive to allow the mom to have that redemption versus in the book where again they kind of make up like they kind of bond over losing their child. But to me, the story of actually the mom able to redeem herself by keeping her child alive and at the end and getting that forgiveness, I think is more effective. But what do you think about that?
It's definitely more effective because the thing is this: a film going audience, one, it's very hard for them to get along in a story in which the dog, which starts off innocent, is turned into like an evil entity by the end that has to be killed. That's one thing. But The reason why I believe they have to have Tad survive is the fact that they've set up the movie where you have this woman, Dee Wallace's character, who is having an affair. That's a bad thing in the 80s for that. And when you have that, and you have she has a husband who's perfectly what do you call it, faithful to her. She has to have some way of redeeming herself. I think that if they had allowed Tad to die at the end, they would have lost the audience. I think that one, audiences don't want to see the child die at the end. Stephen King can write whatever he wants to in his books, but when you're watching, when you're trying to create a movie that's general purpose and general audience, and you already have an audience that already has to go along with a story in which the dog gets rabies and goes evil, you have to give them some levity by the end. If they had killed Thad by the end of the movie, you would have lost the entire audience. The audience would have gone. They wouldn't have gone with it, and no one. You would have gotten worse reviews. And right now, people are kind of mixed because those people who read the book said, "Oh, they changed the ending," but the ending change works for the story being told. That means that the family unit can return to being a wholesome family unit by the end of the film, even though it's missing the dog. But you have the son, the mother, and the father all together again. You know that Dee Wallace is not going back to her her person of the affair. She's going to go back to her husband. She's going to go back to her child, and it's more or less a happier ending. You need something like that after she beats the hell out of the dog. She kills the dog. Yeah. In a magnificent way, by the way. In a magnificent way.
Yeah, I'm honestly one thing I was kind of surprised about with the story in general is there's not as much death as I would imagine the story would have had. Like a lot of times the character of Steve, the guy that the mother cheats on, a lot of times in these horror movies they get their comeuppance. Like he would get his comeuppance, like there would be a lot more comeuppance. There's only in the story 3 deaths. Like the dog only kills the father of who owns Cujo, the friend of the father, and then a cop. Other than that, that's the only deaths in the story, which is kind of surprising to a point because again, like in a lot of horror movie stereotypes, the ex, the affair would have been also usually killed because horror movie tropes of like bad people get to come up in. So that's another surprise I found with the story was the fact there wasn't a lot of deaths, and it felt like that character Steve, because again he goes in, he fucks with the house, and then he leaves, and then he's gone from the story. Like he doesn't. There's no comeuppance for him.
So I would say that if they were to do a remake, he would get his comeuppance.
Yes, absolutely, he would.
But in the 80s, and since I haven't read the original story, I don't know if he actually survives the story or not. The ideal is to keep it as real as possible because the more, I guess you'd call it, crazier aspects that you can do. And if you've read Stephen King, you know that he has some crazy things that happen in his fucking later novels. His earlier novels almost seem tame compared to his later novels. We all know that. And since Cujo's one of his earlier novels, and he was, drunk and alcoholic binge and doesn't remember what he wrote, I'm surprised this came out of him. I do believe that a modern day audience would take approach this material completely different than they would now. It'd be the same as if you're putting the original Pet Sematary film, which Stephen King wrote, next to the remake that is supposed to be more adhesive to modern day audiences. They are very different films based on the same concept. I believe the same thing would happen to Cujo. I think Cujo is a product of the 80s. They would not do the story in the same way. They may actually have something to do with a genetically modified bat that gets some type of rabies that changes people into zombies or something. I could see someone doing that.
Yep, I agree. I think again, I'm trying to think when the last time we had like an animal attack movie.
There, as long if it's not a shark or an alligator, they don't
Yes.
happen very often. There
Yeah.
seems to be like 10 alligator and shark attack movies every year now.
Yes. But
Trend.
like normal, I don't think I can't. It's been so long since we've actually had a movie like that. Actually, I can see right here.
Well, you have Cocaine Bear, but that's a bear on cocaine. It'd have to be extravagantly crazy like that, like something that's so far from being realistic that you have to make it funny, and that is the complete opposite of this movie. This movie's not funny; it's depressing.
Yes.
It is
So this would be the closest equivalent to Cujo. It's a movie that came out in 2006
backcountry
called The Breed, and it's about this family.
dogs.
It's about this family dealing with, like you said, ravenous, genetically enhanced dogs.
I know. I've seen the movie.
That would be what Cujo, like you said, that would be what Cujo would be today. But
Uh, well, if you've seen Rottweiler or Man's Best Friends, they're genetically enhanced or robotically enhanced dogs. You couldn't like. I'm trying to think of a movie, a dog movie that's a normal dog movie that dog goes crazy and kills people. A dog or even the birds or any you not what Alfred Hitchcock did with the birds. You're not going to see again. That doesn't happen. You'd have to have something's wrong with them. Global warming's causing the birds to go crazy, or you know,
it's spores. Spores. The spores are causing them to go crazy.
it doesn't happen anymore. I think I think audiences don't want a more innocent type of film like Cujo. I mean, Cujo is something that in reality could happen. It has happened. Dogs have gotten rabies and they have gone wild and attacked people. It's happened. Um,
Even without rabies, like it's like that's the thing. That was one
yeah.
of the inspirations for Cujo was there actually was a story. It was I've got the article here. It happened in 1974. A Saint Bernard killed Saint Bernard killed a 6-year-old boy and no rabies. They don't know what caused. They think that maybe maybe the kid may provoke the dog. But again, like the dog, there was no rabies. Like they checked, he tested negative for rabies. The dog just randomly attacked and killed a boy. And funny enough, when I was trying to find that article, that actually happened again in 2021. Saint Bernard killed a 7-month-old boy. So like it, and again, same thing. There was no rabies involved. Like dogs do, unfortunately, like happens all the time. It doesn't matter what breed.
Yeah.
Like sometimes dogs just attack.
It's unfortunate. It is unfortunate, but I think I think we've touched on an aspect that it would be hard for someone to kind of come up with an ideal in which a dog without any genetic enhancements, robotic enhancements, or AI enhancements, will just go off and kill people. I think it would be a hard sell to modern day audiences because I think modern day audiences needs a reason why dogs do that. There doesn't have to be a reason. They need a reason to justify it. I would love to see someone come up with something like that. I've seen plenty of movies like if there's a low budget movie called Bear, where there's nothing wrong with the bear starts attacking people, because it's a bear. It's an animal most people already have a fear of, already have thinks that bears attack people just randomly all the time, which doesn't really happen. Just like sharks don't fucking just randomly eat people. We've kind of blown that out of proportion with the movie Jaws, and we've opened the Pandora's box, and it's never getting closed again. Every year, there's like 5 to 10 films in which randomly normal sharks just start killing people. There's no reason, but we'll buy into that because we're afraid of those. We're not afraid of dogs. We're not afraid of cats. So when you see a movie like that, there has to be a justification for why they go that way.
Sometimes people, hey, although I would say that the latest remake of Cats, that scared a lot of people with Cats. I'll tell you that much. But no, that's exactly right, is that people just aren't afraid. Like, people want to have a disconnect They
Yes.
don't want just a dog. They just don't want a dog movie of a dog going crazy because that's too close to home. They want some. They again. They want a reason. They want. Oh, it got rabies. Oh, it got. Um. Oh, it's genetically modified. Like it's also interesting too because with stories with rabies specifically, back then Cujo, Old Yeller, like rabies was a big thing that was an explanation of, oh, an animal went crazy because of rabies. You
Yeah.
don't see that too often anymore in explanation with stories now about rabies. Like every once in a while it would be sprinkled. But it's funny back then, rabies was a big thing that they always would be a story plot of, oh, something's going crazy. It was rabies.
Ah, rabies. Rabies gets a bad rap. Rabies is not nearly as bad as everyone makes it out to be.
Always got rabies. Um, now,
So,
one other fun thing. This will never happen, but a little fun fact. Apparently, Sunclass Pictures in 2015 announced that they were going to readapt Cujo, but they did it as an abbreviation. It's Cujo stands for Canine Unit Joint Operations, which nothing has been announced since then, so it's probably dead in the water. But a little fun
uh,
fact about talking about Cujo's longevity. And another fun fact is apparently, so Stephen King has a kind of a little collection coming out called You Like It Darker, which is coming out on May 2024. And he actually, one of the excerpts in that story will be a sequel to Cujo.
interesting. So we're very topical and talking about this because I didn't know any of this. I hate to say this, I haven't read any of Stephen King's more recent books. I think Elevation was the last recent book of his I read, and that's been several years ago. So, not to say something's bad about Stephen King. Stephen King writes a lot, and so
Yes,
I
he
can't get
does.
around to everything he reads when it comes out. Just for you listeners out there, I am currently reading a Stephen King story. Unfortunately for all of you, it is The Body, which became Stand By Me, which is not a horror story. But that's the one I'm currently reading. I'm trying to catch up with some of the older ones. So if I do end up reading Cujo, which I hope and one day I will get around to, I'll have to we'll have to revisit this so that I can tell everyone exactly my thoughts on the book versus the actual movie. Which begs me to answer a question, Philip. Have you read any Stephen King books at all, or is all your experience from watching films based on his work?
It is. I have not read a single. I need to be better about reading books. I have not read a single Stephen King book. Uh, It's funny. My first introduction to Stephen King was the movie. Make sure I get the right one. Surprisingly, it was Carrie.
Oh, okay.
Carrie, Carrie was my introduction to Stephen King. The Carrie movie
Which
was
one? Don't be
uh,
saying the one that just came out.
no, 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 no. The original Carrie. The original Carrie was the first thing I saw that introduced me to Stephen King, and then after that, I saw The Shining.
Hmm.
Uh, so that was how I first got into Stephen King, actually, or knowing about Stephen King in general. And I just have not, like you said, there's so many books. So I think starting out, I think some of the more famous Stephen King stuff is why I want to read. I have actually read some of his shorts, sometimes, but I've not read the bigger stories, uh, 'cause there's just so many.
There are so many. I'm a little. I get it. This is just taking a little side story. I've read a lot of Stephen King books, but the ones that I have not read and I've avoided are all of his fantasy books and the ones that are way too many page counts, except for Tommy Knockers. I've read Tommy Knockers, and that's a thick ass book, and I'm surprised I got through the whole thing because I don't like to read very long stories, but I got through that one. Another good way to catch up on some of Stephen King stuff is to actually just listen to the audiobooks. There are some amazing audiobooks out there that are unabridged and it gives you the whole gist of the books. which are really good. And sometimes they have really great people reading them. Sissy Spacek reads Carrie, and I thought that was absolutely brilliant. But there's also some great other audiobooks out there. I've been a Stephen King fan because my mother was a Stephen King fan, and so I got hooked on Stephen King really early. Uh, uh, Fortunately or unfortunately for me, the first one I read was Misery. My mother's was It, but it was intimidating. It's too many damn pages.
Yes.
I was a kid when my mother was reading It. And I read Misery, but I always had Stephen King around the house. And then, in the 90s, I read almost everything that was coming out as it was coming out. And then as I got older, I tapered off. And so now I'm much older, and I'm trying to catch up. Uh, you know,
Also, I was wrong earlier. No, the first Stephen King, it was not Shining and Carrie. The first Stephen King thing I ever saw was Pet Cemetery. That was actually the first Stephen King thing I ever saw, which really disturbed me as a kid.
So funny, we took a little turn off of this to go to Stephen King, but that's perfectly fine because I will tell everyone Pet Cemetery was the first Stephen King film I saw in the theater. That was when my mother was a huge fan, and we started on this binge of watching every Stephen King film that came out at the theater. So Pet Cemetery was the start of it, but I saw everything from The Mangler, Graveyard Shift. I like literally every Stephen King movie that came out at the theater, my mother would take me to as they were coming out, and so I saw them all. Even the crappier, the better. My mother would always say. The more thought provoking ones like Stand by Me, Shawshank Redemption, she didn't get around to as much as I did. She got around to The Mangler and Pet Cemetery, the Miseries, and all those films I saw at the theater as a kid. All right, so Philip, now that we took a little bit of turn off of Cujo to talk about Stephen King, do you have any final thoughts for our audience in regards to your experiences or anything in regards to Stephen King's Cujo, whether it be the book or the actual movie?
No, I mean, like again, as a again, if you, it's very interesting about again, like there was a lot of detours with some of the story with Cujo that I was actually surprised about that I really enjoyed. There's a lot of the more beginning is a little slow at times, and again, I was actually again I'm surprised there weren't a lot of deaths, a lot more deaths involved. But one thing we didn't talk about filmmaking wise is I was impressed with everything they were able to do with the dogs. They actually had four different dog actors to do a lot of the scenes and stuff, and then occasionally they had a guy in a dog suit to make some scenes happen. But I was honestly impressed with you never know with these type of when you have movies where you rely on animal actors and stuff. It's always a coin flip, and I thought the animal acting was actually really good for the most part in Cujo, like uh to what they were able to achieve and stuff. So is it something is it a cult classic? To a point, yes. Uh it's there's some problems with it. But there's some good things about it. It's nowhere close to be one of Stephen King's best, but it's nowhere close to being Stephen King's worst.
Yeah, I will agree with you on that one. I believe that unfortunately, I think Cujo is a product of its time. It is a product of the 80s. And I think it is completely overlooked by a lot of modern day audiences just because of the plethora of Stephen King based material out there. And as of right now, we are seeing remakes of a lot of that stuff now. And I don't think anyone is thinking about really remaking Cujo. Uh, um, Cujo is just that story that in the 80s you could have gotten away with no problem, but to try and adapt it for a modern day audience, I think would be a difficult one without completely changing it. Sort of like what they did with the Pet Cemetery remake. Uh, I think the only way to make it work is to completely change it. And that's probably one of the reasons why there's not enough people revisiting it. That being said, I do hope that listeners, that you decide to revisit Cujo. And if you've never seen Cujo because it just has not hit your radar, that you will go out there and seek it. Because I do believe that it is one of the better 80s movies in regards to nature gone amok type of movies. We now have been inundated with Sharknadoes and lava tarantulas and all the other kind of crap that's come out there. But so it's good to go back to the basics. And Cujo is one of the better films to go back to the basics. I want to thank Philip for joining me on this week's Conversations in Horror. Everyone out there, I hope that you enjoyed this episode and that you will seek out more movies that are based on Stephen King or books, because I want to encourage people to read too, because I enjoy Stephen King books and I hope you enjoy them too. He is a phenomenal writer who just keeps cranking them out and keeps coming up with crazier ideas. Thank you for joining us on Conversations in Horror. You all have a pleasant evening and we hope to see you back on our next show. Thank you and good day. Conversations in Horror is a Broken Lighthouse Pictures production, produced by Kevin L. Powers, executive produced by Kelly A. Inoka, and originally filmed via Zoom technology. Conversations in Horror is hosted by Kevin L. Powers and co-hosted by various horror film lovers and filmmakers. To learn more about Mr. Powers, please make sure to check out his Patreon page and other social media platforms. Conversations in Horror is copyright 2024 Broken Lighthouse Pictures production.